Repeat the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those that trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Almighty God, who in thy wisdom and goodness has appointed the office of rulers and parliaments for the welfare of society and the just government of men, we beseech thee to behold with thy abundant favor us thy servants whom thou hast been pleased to call to the performance of important trust in these islands. Let thy blessing descend upon us here assembled, and grant that we may treat and consider all matters that shall come under our deliberation in so just and faithful a manner as to promote thy honor and glory, and to advance the peace, prosperity, and welfare of these islands and of those whose interests thou hast committed to our charge. And this we beg for Jesus Christ's sake. Amen. May the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ and the love of God and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with us all evermore. Amen.
Good morning, members. Members, the minutes of the 11th and the 13th of March have been deferred.
Messages from the governor.
There are none.
Announcements by the speaker.
There are two announcements this morning. One, I've received notification from MP Jean Atherton that she'll be absent today, and the Minister of Education has indicated he'll be out as well due to health reasons today.
Messages from the Senate.
There are none.
Papers and other communications to the House.
We have one paper of communication, and that's from the Minister of Finance. Minister?
Good morning, Mr. Speaker.
Good morning.
Mr. Speaker, I have the honor to attach and submit for the information of the Honorable House of Assembly the actuarial review of the Contributory Pension Fund of Bermuda as of August 1st, 2017.
Thank you.
Petitions.
There are none.
Statements by ministers.
Yes, we have three statements this morning. First two in the name of Minister of Finance. Minister?
Mr. Speaker, I rise this morning to provide this Honorable House with an update on some of the proactive economic and fiscal measures to be taken by the Ministry of Finance to combat the likely systemic threat that the COVID-19 pandemic will have on the economy of Bermuda and, by extension, government's finances. Mr. Speaker, during this crisis, the government of Bermuda is committed to ensuring that we communicate as often as possible with information that is vital to our community who are looking for answers to natural concerns. The COVID-19 pandemic has already had significant health, economic, and social impact on people and countries around the globe. This government has therefore already taken key steps to address this serious threat to the safety and welfare of the residents of Bermuda. As countries have had to take extraordinary measures to prevent the spread of this virus, it has had a very negative impact on global markets and economies. In light of the potential impact of all of this on Bermuda, the government is taking proactive steps to help provide appropriate financial assistance to Bermudians and to protect our island's economy. Mr. Speaker, this government takes seriously its responsibility to assist the most vulnerable in our community, especially during times such as this, and the public can be assured that this continues to be one of our main focuses. To this end, the relevant subcommittees of Cabinet are meeting on an ongoing basis as needed to ensure that this crisis is appropriately managed. Mr. Speaker, the current actions being taken as part of the Ministry of Finance COVID-19 pandemic fiscal plan are as follows. To provide financing to supplement reduced revenues, the government is taking necessary action to secure emergency liquidity lines of credit with local financial institutions. The required discussions have been held with all relevant parties to gain the necessary approvals, including an associated $150 million increase in the debt ceiling. This will bring the debt ceiling to $2.9 billion. These facilities will be used only when it is absolutely necessary. The ministry will provide additional funding for the unemployment fund to further assist Bermudians who are unemployed. Lower priority expenditures will be curtailed to ensure that spending needed for COVID-19 matters can be maintained. To that end, over the next 3 months, government will delay the start of any capital projects that have not commenced, institute an immediate freeze on posts that are not required to address COVID-19 or to protect Bermuda's national interest, continue the ban on non-essential government travel, and reduce all discretionary spending, including training, materials and supplies, clothing and uniforms, etc. Mr. Speaker, no spending reductions will be made that will jeopardize the health, safety, and security of the people of Bermuda. Bermuda's unemployed will be assisted, and fiscal prudence will be strictly maintained. To be clear, protecting Bermuda from the health and economic impact of COVID-19 is our priority. Additionally, the Ministry of Finance has stepped up its monitoring of global economic conditions and its interaction with key stakeholders in the public and private sectors. To this end, the ministry has already had very productive meetings with the Bermuda Bankers Association and is in regular communication with our union partners, representatives of key employers, and other critical public agencies. We have sought their input in fine-tuning contingency plans in the event of a severe downturn in Bermuda's economy, while also having discussions with them in relation to appropriate actions they should take to assist the people of Bermuda during this challenging time. Mr. Speaker, the future is not clear, but we do anticipate that there will be economic and fiscal consequences for Bermuda stemming from COVID-19. The implications for Bermuda will likely include a downturn in visitor arrivals, a reduction in consumer spending, retail sales may slow further in 2020, slower growth in the overall Bermuda economy, a rise in unemployment, and reductions in government revenues. The Ministry of Finance will continue to evaluate probable economic scenarios, including economic circumstances that may result in even more severe reductions in business conditions, employment, and government revenues. This will allow for further temporary emergency measures to be taken if necessary, so that government can maintain essential public services and continue to service the needs of our community. In closing, I'm confident that Bermuda and her people will emerge from this crisis stronger. Together, we have already considered a wide range of possibilities and made plans to address them and strengthen Bermuda's capacity to weather the storm on the economic and fiscal horizons. Mr. Speaker, I wish to once again assure the people of Bermuda that the government is sensitive to the challenges facing us from COVID-19, and with your support and cooperation, we will continue to take required steps to navigate our island through these difficult economic and financial times. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Minister, while on your feet, would you like to do your second statement?
Mr. Speaker, in accordance with Section 35 of the Contributory Pensions Act of 1970, I am pleased to table the Contributory Pension Fund, CPF, or the Fund Actuary Report as at August 1st, 2017. The main purpose of the 2017 actuarial review was to consider the implications for future contribution rates of maintaining benefits at their present levels in real terms and to consider the long-term sustainability of the fund. The review includes projections of contribution income and expenditure on benefits and administration, projections of the fund balances owing for an assumed rate of investment return, and projections of the number of years outgo secured by the fund. Mr. Speaker, the contributory pension scheme plays an important role in Bermuda's pension arrangements, providing a first-tier or basic pension to more than 11,400 seniors and other beneficiaries, the majority of whom live in Bermuda. The maximum benefit is currently $1,540 $5.63 per month. Altogether, some 13,298 persons currently receive benefits under the Act. Currently, the average pension paid under the CPF is around 28% of the median annual gross earnings of Bermudians, as indicated in the Bermuda Job Market Employment Brief produced by the Department of Statistics. Mr. Speaker, even though the actuarial review is an excellent tool in overall pension management, it is important to recognize that the financial projections for future years are based on reasonable assumptions, and they should not be taken as forecast of the outcome. The projections should be updated at successive actuarial reviews in light of the latest information available. The main findings of the actuarial review are as follows. The fund earned a nominal rate of return net of investment expense of 3.5% per annum and a real rate of 1.8% per annum over the 3 years since the last review, 3.1% and 1.4% if investment expenses are excluded. This exceeded the policy index, but compared with the real rate of return assumption of 3.5%. The net assets of the fund grew by 3.46% over the 3 years, from $1.8 billion to $1.83 billion. This was 8.8% below the projected value from the previous review. Contribution income in 2016-17 of $121.7 million was 13% higher than in 2013-2014, and benefit expenditure, $155.8 million, increased 16% over the 3 years since the last review. Total expenses for the 3 years averaged 0.37% of the average fund, down from 0.52% over the previous 3 years. Pure administrative expenses averaged 15 basis points of the average fund over the 3 years and 14 basis points of the average fund at the review date. As a percentage of contribution income, total expenses have been relatively stable over the last 10 years at 7%. Since the last review, the number of contributors remained relatively constant, from 34,806 in the year ending 31st of July 2014 to 34,890 in the year ending July 31st, 2017. Both the benefit and contribution rates increased during the inter-review period by 5% and 7.5% respectively, effective August of 2016. Based on the population projection figures, the old age support ratio has declined since the last review. The ratio was 3.9 in 2014 and is 3.6 in 2017. The ratio is projected to decline to 1.6 over the next 50 years. The comparative ratio using the actual contributors and beneficiaries of the fund declined from 3.0 in 2014 to 2.7 in 2017. The asset to expenditure ratio is a static measure of the size of the fund to annual expenditure, or the number of years cover provided by the fund based on the current annual expenditure. This ratio decreased over the 3 years from 12.6 years to 11.5 years. Compared with 14 other regional Social Security schemes in a 2013 study, Bermuda's ratio is better than 9 of these countries, averaging 7.5 years. By comparison, the ratio for the Canada pension plan in 2017 was 6.56 years. The fund is projected to increase gradually until 2023, then decline steadily until it is exhausted in 2047 under the best estimate scenario. This is a 2-year earlier when compared to the previous review. Mr. Speaker, honorable members are advised that the financial performance of the fund over the 3 years was below expectation due to lower than expected investment returns and contribution income. This was offset by lower than expected administrative and investment expenses and benefits payments. The viability with the fund being able to cover at least 11 years of the current expenditure and being positive for the next 29 years. However, recognizing the long-term demographic challenges of the fund, the ministry will continue to closely monitor the performance of the fund. Mr. Speaker, it should be noted that the funding policy for the fund is not based on full actuarial funding, but based on sustainable funding. That is, contributions plus investment income should cover benefits and administrative expenses on an annual basis while the fund builds up sufficient reserves to cover several years of benefits and expenses to withstand future adverse circumstances. Mr. Speaker, honorable members should note that in order to improve the projected financial position of the fund in the long term, the report has laid out various alternative scenarios that will be considered by the ministry in seeking to preserve the long-term financial viability of the fund. Honorable members are advised that the finalization of the 2017 actuarial report was delayed due to problems in extracting data from the report. In addition, some of the data requests from the actuary had changed compared to prior years, resulting in further delays in data extraction. Mr. Speaker, recent pronouncements about a change in the CPF contribution structure from a fixed rate structure to one based on a percentage of income have not been included in this report. The ministry considered it prudent to have an update on the current financial position of the fund before any material changes were made to the design of the fund, noting that the last review was done as at the 1st of August of 2014. The actuaries have started modeling the effect of changing the CPF from a flat rate contribution to one based on a percentage of income, but more work has to be done on this proposal. Mr. Speaker, the CPF was established in 1970 and thus has a rather simplistic design. Since the CPF was established, there have not been any meaningful reforms to the plan, even after the mandatory National Pension Scheme Occupational Pensions Act was introduced. Accordingly, the ministry is of the view that any reform of the CPF should take a holistic view of pensions for the various categories of workers to reduce coverage gaps, excessive amounts, and/or anomalies. With the CPF as the first pillar of retirement income, reformed CPF benefits together with other pensions could provide for progressive benefits and a contribution formula at levels that can lead to the sustainability of the CPF in the longer term. Meanwhile, it is important that government review the 2017 actuarial report and take the required actions to enhance sustainability of the fund. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Finance proposes to engage the government actuary of record and any other service provider required to conduct a comprehensive review of all pensions in Bermuda. It is anticipated that this engagement will be completed by the end of 2020 and will be shared with the Honorable House. Honorable members are advised that the next actuary review of the Contributory Pension Fund is scheduled for the period ending July 31, 2020. Mr. Speaker, despite the encouraging short to medium-term outlook of the fund, what is clearly evident from this latest review is that Bermuda, like most of the developed world, is faced with the challenges associated with the growth of an aging population. During the next 50 years, the number of people over pension age of 65 are expected to increase from 10,484 to 17,665, an increase of 7,181, or 68%. This increase in our seniors will obviously place a greater strain on the country's pension system. Honorable members should note that in order to improve the projected financial position of the fund in the long term, the ministry will carefully consider alternate scenarios included in the report. Mr. Speaker, in closing, I wish to assure members, and more importantly, current and future pensioners, that the government is sensitive to the challenges facing pension plans of this nature and will endeavor to take the appropriate steps to enhance the benefits paid from the scheme, as well as ensure the fund has the ongoing ability to pay for such benefits. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. That closes the statements this morning from ministers and junior ministers. We'll now move on.
Reports of committee,
There are none.
question period.
Question period. The questions this morning are related to the statement given this morning. Minister of Finance, there are 3 members who have indicated I'd like to put questions to you in reference to your first statement. And the first question this morning will come from the Leader of the Opposition. Honorable member, would you like to put your question?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and good morning to everyone.
Good morning.
As we move through this ever-changing time and subject of the coronavirus, I wanted to ask the minister a question in light of already the economic effect on Bermuda with cruise ships, airline restrictions, quarantines in place, schools now closing, and the likes. Just trying to find out whether or not or when does he expect realistically to be able to get some answers from the banks in aiding Bermuda during this trying time. I know that he is in discussions with them, and things are changing on a daily basis. But if he can just let the public know a little more about how he's proceeding with these measures, taking into consideration that, and I want to say this to everyone here in the public and in this chambers, Bermuda came to the aid of the banks when they needed help. It is now time for the banks to show up. They need to show up, Speaker. And I've assured the minister in my discussions this weekend with him, and also I have been in more than usual discussions with the premier over the weekend as well. And I am concerned. I need to know, and the public needs to know, that the banks are going to show up. So they can be rest assured, and they can be assured that we will be calling, as well as in opposition to support the minister. So if he can help us out with giving Bermuda some more detail.
Thank you. Minister?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaker, let me start by first thanking the Honorable Opposition Leader for his support during these challenging times. I can report that I met with the Bermuda Bankers Association last week, Thursday, at which we discussed a range of issues around financial consequences of this COVID virus. When the meeting adjourned, the action item was that the banks would come back to me today with their answers with respect to my request that they give consideration to reducing rates and a broader conversation around how they plan to support their customers, both from the retail side as well as the corporate side. Mr. Speaker, yesterday afternoon, the Federal Reserve, in an extraordinary move, reduced rates down to zero to 25 basis points. I had a call last evening with the Bermuda Bankers Association, most of the members, and a subsequent call after the main call with another member. And I expect that the banks will, over the course of today and tomorrow, make announcements themselves around the actions that they propose to take. Prior to coming to this chamber this morning, I had a conversation with one of the banks who will be making an announcement imminently, setting out their position on rates, as well as how they will engage customers who are having difficulty servicing their mortgages and other credit obligations over the coming weeks and months. I am confident that the banks will show up. I have left it to them to determine what's appropriate by being ever clear of the precedent that has been set by the Federal Reserve a week and a half ago on Wednesday and yesterday. And so we'll wait their public statements.
Thank you, Minister. Second question or supplementary? No? Okay. We're going to the next member. The next member has a question for you, Minister, is the member from constituency 23. Honorable member?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, to the minister, given his recognition of the negative financial impact, according to his statement, could the minister advise whether he will bring to this honorable house a mini budget of sorts, perhaps in 3 months when there is better indication as to what the financial impact is, given that what we've been debating over the last 6 days that we've completed and finishing up today, that budget is effectively obsolete.
Minister?
Mr. Speaker, we are in uncharted territory, and so I will commit to updating the House as appropriate on the country's finances. I would remind members that we are 2 weeks shy of the close of the current fiscal year. Tax revenues are expected to come in on April the 15th. The first quarter is generally a robust one for the government from a tax collection perspective. But we will have no concept of what we will be experiencing until we've actually experienced it. And so in the spirit of kind of being transparent about government's finances, I commit to updating the House regularly on where the government stands financially.
Thank you, Minister. Supplementary, no further? Okay, the next question this morning, Minister, is from the member from constituency 10. Would you like to put your question?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and good morning to all colleagues. And first, let me state that I applaud the government staying on the case and being as aggressive as possible and keeping the community aware of what's going on. But let's face it, the situation is going to get worse before it gets better. And so I appreciate the Honorable Minister's statement today. But in looking at page 4 of the statement, the Minister says the Ministry of Finance will continue to evaluate probable economic scenarios. And it goes on to say, including economic circumstances that may well result in a more severe reduction in business conditions. This is a true and telling statement, and I'd ask the Honorable Minister, what are the current plans to deal with those that are going to be severely impacted? I refer to seniors who are probably struggling now with the limits on their prescriptions, knowing that there could be some interruption in the supply chain, and people perhaps doing some, what I would call panic buying at the present time. And secondly, I refer to businesses that are forcing people to work from home and how employed people will be covered with their salaries in these circumstances. And thirdly, small businesses whose businesses are drastically shrinking now because people are not taking on the jobs that they would. How are they going to be helped? The need is real, and we should be talking about it and addressing it before it happens, because it is coming.
Minister?
Mr. Speaker, I would refer honorable colleague to the second page of my statement and the first bullet point, which speaks to the speaking with local banks to secure additional lines of credit for $150 million of incremental liquidity as being the first step in being able to position to provide support to various members of our community. For me to stand here and suggest that I have thought through every single permutation of what could go wrong would be patently untrue. What I have done, though, is try to position the government in a place where it has the fiscal financial resources to provide the support necessary for all of our citizens should they fall upon hard times. We are in uncharted territory, and so I stay very, very cautious of trying to scenario play all the possible outcomes of what's going to happen as a result of this pandemic. But what I can do is make sure that government has the financial resources to respond appropriately to those citizens who actually have needs. A number of employers at this point are doing a bunch of work trying to figure out how they're going to cope with the situation. Many people are working from home. We've appealed to the utilities, to the banks, to have some patience and to display some dispensation to people who are having difficulty meeting their obligations. That's the beginning of a process. We will continue to do that work over the course of the coming weeks as the impact of this virus becomes clearer and clearer to us.
Thank you, Minister. Supplementary? Further question? Supplementary?
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Honorable Minister for that comment. So the minister will secure the credit line of $150 million. Will the minister undertake to come back to the House as soon as possible and tell more plans of how that money is going to be used? Because obviously people are going to start wanting to reach out, and they need to be reaching out in the appropriate place. These are serious considerations that people are asking us through the weekend as we move forward.
Minister?
Mr. Speaker, let me be very clear about this, because I think it's really important. One of my responsibilities is to protect the fiscal purse of this country, a responsibility that I take very, very seriously. However, we are in a situation where we can face an economic catastrophe, and I, quite candidly, am not focused on the amount of debt that we're taking on to provide the necessary support to citizens, because in my mind, as I'm sure is everybody else's mind in here, people come first. And we need to be very, very, very careful about this. And I think last week, Wednesday or Thursday, I spoke with the Shadow Minister of Finance as I was reflecting on increasing a debt ceiling, because I thought that this was an opportunity for this House to demonstrate how we can behave as bipartisan around confronting an issue of national emergency. I will say this, that I have been overly impressed with the support that I've received from MP Pamplin Gordon and the opposition leader with respect to kind of being broadly aligned with me around working with me to get through this issue from a financing perspective. We have to, and I understand the honourable member's question. I don't have all the answers to all the questions at this point, but I can tell you this. This is not an opportunity to kind of run around and spend money like willy-nilly. We have to be very strategic about how we use these funds because they are limited. And we have to make sure that they are being deployed and used for the purposes that meet the best needs of our people.
Thank you, Minister. And supplementary?
Yes, a supplementary. And I thank the minister for his acknowledgement that we actually have had significant talks over the course of the past week because we recognize the situation in which the country finds itself. I think the question that I just want for the minister to explain and to underscore for the public edification is that the increase in the debt ceiling will come by way of an increased line of credit. And he's not going out to grab a whole lot of money to have cash available. So it will be done, the getting of the cash and the expenditure thereof will be predicated upon what the immediate demands are. I think that that's an important point for the public to understand, that we're not putting a whole lot of extra money into the kitty to say, oh, here's great big cash and we can spend it at will. I think if the minister can just underscore that point for the edification of the public, I think that would be useful in terms of understanding not just the process, but where we stand.
Thank you. Minister?
Speaker, I thank the honourable member for that question. So every February 15th, the government collects what I refer to as a bounty. It's a bunch of money that comes in from payroll taxes. It is the high point of the year from a cash perspective for the government. So do I foresee an immediate need to draw down on the lines of credit that we're putting in place to deal with this crisis? The answer to that is no. But I would be being irresponsible if I didn't try to plan for an eventuality that may come to pass. And so the securing of lines and the raising of a debt ceiling is a preventative measure, one that is intended to have with me having some foresight in terms of what's going to happen going forward. The last thing that I want any of us to suffer through is to run into a liquidity crisis and not having taken the appropriate steps to ensure that we have the liquidity lines in place. This is a preventative measure. The funds are not going to be drawn unless they are absolutely needed. I foresee that we have sufficient liquidity at the moment to deal with current needs, but in the event that those needs should change or circumstances should change, we want to have the lines in place to ensure that we can fund the ongoing working of the government.
Thank you. Any further questions or supplementary? There are none. We'll move on. Congratulatory. Yep.
Congratulatory and obituary speeches.
Does any member wish to speak? Recognize the honourable member Swan from St. George's. Honourable member, you have the floor.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, like for that of condolence be and recognition to of the life of Joycelyn Marie Burgess of Wellington Back Road, Mr. Speaker. Very humble lady who was funeralized on Thursday, and I had the opportunity to join in with many in the community to see her, to be at her homegoing service. Mr. Speaker, not too far around the corner from her is Lois Painter, who will be funeralized today. Another senior who is a stalwart matriarch of the Painter family down there on Waterloo Lane. I'd like recognition of her passing in this house, and condolences have been extended to her family from myself, but I wanted to recognize her contribution to her family and her community. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Marshall Aswit, the family of Marshall Aswit from Warwick, associate the honorable member Mr. Terrell with that. Former member of this house as well from way back when.
Mhm.
Lived, honorable member Cole Simons, honorable
That's right,
member the
yes.
whole house.
Yes,
Yeah, he was a member.
yes, 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 yes.
1972 to
My
1976,
bad,
he was a
Mr.
member of
Astor,
this house.
that's right. He was.
Mr. Graham Seaton,
That- that-
who was almost my neighbor. He lived on the third tee of Castle Harbor Golf Course. I used to see him a lot of times when he was on his leisurely walks. His wife Rhonda Dismond, yes, made his contribution with Pan Am. Mr. Graham Seaton, very nice man, humble businessman. And also, Mr. Speaker, this is a memorial was held in St. George's Cricket Club on Saturday for the passing of Cal Rayner, CO. Passed 5 years ago, he died on the field, and the family still mourn his passing, and had the honor to be able to say a few words on Saturday. And the only word of comfort I could think of that was most fitting was love is the greatest gift given to us by the good Lord. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Any other members to speak?
Yes, good morning, Mr. Speaker.
Would you like to add a contribution this morning?
I sure would. I sure would.
Go right ahead, Ms. Ming.
First of all, I'd like to extend congratulations to Sablé Crockle. She is the new president of St. David's Cricket Club. And obviously we throw our support behind the young lady. And I'd also like to say happy birthday to one of my constituents, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Calla Smith. If your name is really a Calvin, but everybody in St. George calls him Calla. His birthday was yesterday, and I just want to give him a shout out because he likes to listen and hear what goes on in this house. Also, I'd like to be associated with the comments for Calvin Rayner. Calvin Rayner, my colleague was absolutely correct that it was 5 years on Saturday, but it was quite emotional for the family as they relived what happened out on the field on that day. And I just want them to know that, and that's on Essie, Tracy, Tanya, Sinclair, all of them, that they are in our thoughts and our prayers today. And then also, I'd like to say happy birthday to Barbara Swan. And she happens to be the mother of MP Kim Swan. And she is celebrating her 87th birthday today. And so because we said her before our colleague, we knew she must be a woman of stature because, I obviously held my colleague in high esteem. So we wish her all the best. We wish her many more and hope that she has a delightful birthday. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, honorable member. Any other honorable members to speak? None? I'm going to actually take a moment. Sorry. No other honorable members should speak at this time. I'm actually going to take a moment to do what's customary. When a former member of this house has passed, we normally take a moment of silence in their recognition of the service they gave to the country. And with all that was going on in reference to the current health matter, I overlooked the fact that we should have started this procedure with this condolences of giving a moment of silence to Mr. Aswit, because he had been a member of parliament in this chamber, well, in the other chamber, and in the early 70s, I believe. Yeah. And it would only be fitting to recognize his contribution to the country. So I would ask all members to join me in standing for a moment of silence for the former member, Mr. Aswit. Thank you, members.
Matters of privilege,
There are none.
personal explanation,
There are none.
notice of motions for the adjournment of the House on matters of urgent public importance,
There are none.
introduction of bills.
There are two bills to be introduced this morning. The first bill is in the name of the Minister of Finance. Minister?
Mr. Speaker, I'm introducing the following bill for its first reading so that it may be placed on the order paper for the next day of meeting, the Government Loans Amendment Act of 2020.
Thank you. And the second bill is in the name of the Minister of Health. Minister?
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Speaker. I'm introducing the following bill for its first reading so that it may be placed on the order paper for the next day of meeting, namely the Public Health Amendment Act 2020.
Thank you.
Okay. Orders of the day.
Right, members, we're now on to the orders of the day. And the first order is the resumption of the committee and supply. But we're going to ask members for your indulgence as we seek to suspend the rule at the moment so that we can deal with the last bill that was just introduced by the Minister of Health in reference to the national importance that it holds right now, considering the health challenge that not only Bermuda, but the world is facing. And with that, members, will you allow us to indulge in the suspension of the rule? Thank you.
Thank you.
Minister?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that the Standing Orders 29 Sub 1 be suspended to enable the House to proceed with the second reading of the bill entitled Public Health Amendment Act 2020.
No objections. Continue, Minister.
Mr. Speaker, first let me stand here and express my thanks to this honorable House for the unanimous support for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to proceed with the bill before this House for consideration this morning. Mr. Speaker, these are extraordinary times in which governments and systems are being tested all over the world. The advent of COVID-19 has required decisive action on the part of decision makers and caused us to adjust our daily lives to mitigate the risk that this virus poses to the communities. The bill before this honorable House proposes to amend the Public Health Act 1949 to provide the authority for the Minister of Health to prevent the threatened spread of a communicable disease of what is referred to as in the first and second schedule by closing schools, cinemas, churches, hotels, or other places of public resort or meetings in Bermuda. Mr. Speaker, I can advise honorable members that communicable diseases of the first and second category are defined in the Principal Act at Part 5, Section 66, and that by order of the 7th of February 2020, COVID-19 was added to the definition of communicable diseases of the first category. Mr. Speaker, I would also like to invite honorable members to note that the proposed amendment augments the intended power of the minister by requiring also that whether there is an immediate risk of an outbreak of such disease in any part of Bermuda must be in the opinion of the chief medical officer. Mr. Speaker, this is an important point as I wish for honorable members and the public to fully appreciate that any action taken by the Minister of Health under these proposed amendments to the Act will be done with the benefit of fulsome public health advice from the island's chief public health officer. Mr. Speaker, I'd also like to advise honorable members that there is a right of appeal to the Court of Summary Jurisdiction against the making of an order pursuant to Section 88.3, which is with respect to this particular act, and Section 88.2 provides that failure to comply with an order is a criminal offense with penalties set out in Sections 186 of a $1,000 fine for the first offense and the second and subsequent offense of $5,000, and also, Mr. Speaker, daily fines of $500 with respect to the continuation of this offense. Mr. Speaker, this government is keenly aware of the economic impact and potential for social disruption that can be caused by the use of this authority. In every public health scenario, there is a balance to be struck. Events around the world which confirm the aggressive spread of this virus and the importance of firm action to preserve life dictate that we must have every tool available to protect the people who live and work in Bermuda. Mr. Speaker, as I commend this bill for the consideration of this honorable House, I wish to thank all of those public officers, especially those within my ministry, who have and continue to devote their every waking hour to the safety and well-being of the people of Bermuda. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Does any other member? We recognize the Shadow Minister of Finance or Health. Finance
And health.
and Health. The
Thank
honorable
you.
member, you have
Thank
the
you.
floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I thank the minister for not just the brief, but for the proactivity in sharing with us the brief in advance of this debate so that we have the opportunity to not just consider matters that are of this level of importance, but also to be able to embrace it with a degree of clarity that is necessary as we represent the people of Bermuda. The amendment that's being made is almost a mirror image of the existing Section 88 of the Act, with the inclusion of one additional clause such that the chief medical officer has to have belief that there is an imminent danger and therefore can exercise the powers that are being conferred under this amendment. As a people, it's important for us to be nimble, for us to recognize how the health of our people could be very easily compromised if we do not have measures in place to be able to arrest any challenges that we might be facing. With that said, I only have one. We obviously support this fully. I just have one quick question in respect of it. And I know that it exists in the present legislation, which speaks to schools. And I think that what is not clear is what the actual logistical protocols are in respect of schools, because there is no indication in the Act as it exists or as it is being amended that the Minister of Education is to be a part of that discussion before schools are closed. Businesses, I get, the minister has that authority. The chief medical officer can make the determination. But I think that within schools, there is a certain additional protocol that is put in place by the school rules and by the education ministry. And I just wonder if we could just make some clarity by way of explanation, obviously not necessarily in changing the bill, but just by way of explanation as to how those logistical protocols will continue to operate. Otherwise, Mr. Speaker, we support the minister in this particular amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, honorable member. Does any other honorable member wish to speak? Mr. Swan?
Yes.
Okay, we recognize honorable member Swan from St. George's. You have the floor.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to take this opportunity to thank the Minister of Health, and particularly those health workers that are and her team around her, who I'm sure are under some very difficult, stressful times at this particular time in our history here in Bermuda. I've had calls from many persons older than me who lived through World War II and war times. And I would say that you can think of any tragedy that may have hit Bermuda, but to think that the entire globe is universally impacted on because of this issue, this coronavirus issue, is extremely significant on many levels. So those particular workers on the front line, Mr. Speaker, and those persons on the front line in leadership have a very difficult task. I want to acknowledge something that the Minister of Finance shared this morning, and other ministers have made mention of the bipartisan effort that has taken place in the House. We saw it last Friday lunchtime. And I will go a step further, Mr. Speaker, to call upon all of us in leadership in our communities to encourage persons to channel any concerns that they might have towards their members of parliament or persons of leadership within their community, and to refrain from the public discourse, as the ministers have indicated, the work that has taken place between the shadow finance and also the shadow health, which is wearing double hat and is communicating with both the Minister of Finance and the Minister of Health, to encourage their supporters and people that even might write on their, or be trying to write to communicate a message that might be contrary to what the spirit that they're practicing is happening. I think that's important, particularly when I look at what was written by a member of the public today, a former legislator who was writing something that could be, and for many of us looked at a message coming from the opposition itself that I deemed unfortunate. And I
Point of
also,
order, Mr. Speaker.
Point of order? Yes?
If the honorable member wouldn't mind yielding, I think it's very important to understand that we are not responsible for the writings that people make, and notwithstanding that people may have had whatever affiliations, we cannot take responsibility. We in this honorable house take our responsibility here very seriously when it comes to the health and concerns of the people of Bermuda, and we cannot take on negative connotations because somebody who might have been, I don't even know the correspondence to which he relates, but I think that it's very important to nip this in the bud. Don't blame the OBA because somebody said something that's stupid.
Thank you.
I appreciate the honorable member characterizing the comments as stupid, and that's the one reason why I did speak. And I preface my remarks, and I have to make this point by complimenting that honorable member and her leader for the bipartisan work that's taking place across the aisle. But I must tie in the fact that it didn't escape me that the daily paper took the opportunity to do something similar. And these are very, I had a constitutional responsibility once in my life. And I remember when the 2007 recession engulfed the world as well. And I remember working hand in hand with the Honorable Hewitt Braun with Bermuda First, and having the responsibility to hold many conversations with leaders of this country, whether or not they be business leaders, under the safe and sacred repository, and act very responsibly. And that is what needs to happen with the media, and that's what needs to happen with other persons out there. And my advice was this, is that we, in recognizing the significance and the threat to the entire world at the level that it is, Mr. Speaker, it is incumbent upon us to not distance ourselves from what our persons might be inclined to say, but show them leadership by communicating them that they have to act a little bit more responsible in this way. And that includes the Royal Gazette. That includes the editor of the Royal Gazette and those that fall under him, Mr. Speaker, because this situation, as we spend hours looking at what's happening on different world mediums, whether or not it be CNN, whether or not it be Fox, wherever you get your news from, is a very stressful time, a very difficult time for many people. I'm in communication, Mr. Speaker, with some leaders in the world. I think of a good friend of mine one of my students, a senior, retired, probably one of the most celebrated judges in North America from the Asian community, who I deem someone who is akin to the NAACP of the Asian community, who expresses to me how difficult this is in their community, how their community in places in Chinatown are being targeted, Mr. Speaker, as a result. And it's important that we realize the type of global panic that could take place, that we need to do all that we can to bring about the right mindset in this country to deal with this very difficult, trying time. I close as I started, Mr. Speaker, by thanking the spirit of bipartisanism that's being practiced in this House. And as leaders, we must communicate that outside of this House to the people that are looking for us for leadership. And that includes social media. That includes private conversations. And that includes if you feel the government needs a bit of advice. The lines of communication are open and they're working. And I encourage persons to channel those communications to persons who they consider their leaders so that they can represent them in a responsible way. And I support our government's efforts in this very difficult set of circumstances. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, honorable member. Does any other honorable member wish to speak? No other honorable member? Minister?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honorable members for their contribution, recognizing again, we are in extraordinary times, and sometimes extraordinary times call for extraordinary measures. There was a question concerning the protocol with respect to the schools, and no doubt any decisions that are made concerning the enforcement of this particular amendment under consideration today will be taken into consideration all factors. However, at the end of the day, ultimately, the mischief or the behind this legislation is to ensure that we take immediate steps when there is perceived by the chief medical officer an immediate risk of an outbreak of a disease. I'd like to also, Mr. Speaker, just remind our colleagues that under the government website, there are protocols and guidance notes with respect to, I'm trying not to call, with respect to things such as self-quarantine guidance, guidance for the hotels, et cetera, as well as guidance for the public schools. So I would certainly encourage members of the public, if you have any questions, to look at, again, recommended resources. And in particular, there is one that deals with the protocols and the guidance for the public schools. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I would ask that this bill do now be committed.
Thank you, member. Deputy?
Members, we are now in committee of the whole for further consideration of the bill entitled the Public Health Amendment Act 2020. Minister Wilson, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to move all three clauses, please.
Continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Clause 1 is the standard citation clause, and Clause 2 amends the Public Health Act 1949 to provide power for the Minister of Health to prevent the threatened spread of communicable disease of the first or second category by closing schools, cinemas, churches, hotels, or other places of public resort or meeting in Bermuda.
Yeah, two clauses. Any speakers? Any further speakers? There be none. Minister, continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that the
Clauses 1 and 2.
clauses, thank you, 1 and 2 be approved, Mr. Chair.
It has been moved that clauses 1 and 2 be approved. Are there any objections to that? There appear to be none. Approved.
Mr. Chair, I move that the preamble be approved.
It has been moved that the preamble be approved. Are there any objections to that? There appear to be none. Approved.
Mr. Chair, I move that the bill be reported to the House as printed.
It's been moved that the bill be reported to the House as printed. Any objections to that? The bill will be reported to the House.
Members, are there any objections to the Public Health Amendment Act being reported to the House as printed? There are none.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Speaker, excuse me.
Yes.
I move that Standing Order 21 be suspended to enable me to move that the bill entitled Public Health Amendment Act 2020 be now read the third time by its title only.
Members, are there any objections to that? There are none. Continue, Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the bill be now read by the third time by its title only and passed.
No objections. It's now been read by a third time and passed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. And I'd like to thank the members of the House for the indulgence of considering the national importance and that particular bill. And now we'll resume with the standing order, the orders of the day and the resumption of the budget debate. And again, for the listening audience, I'd like to acknowledge the cooperation of both sides of the House that this portion of the debate for today has been altered, and that the Minister of National Security will be the ministry debated today, and then we'll have the conclusion of the budget debate. And with that, I ask the Minister of Finance to move us into the resumption of the debate.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House do now resume in Committee of Supply to consider the estimates of revenue and expenditure for 2020, 2021, I'm sorry.
Thank you. Then the chair for this morning will be the Honorable Member, Mr. Tyrrell. Mr. Tyrrell, would you like to take the chair? Thank you.
Good morning, members. Honorable members, we are now in Committee of the Whole for further consideration of, my bad. Where am I reading? You got the wrong one. Honorable members, we are now in the Committee of Supply for further consideration of the estimates of revenue and expenditure for the year 2020/2021, heads 63, 98, 2, 5, 56, 85, 92, and 101 are now to be debated. I call on the minister in charge to proceed.
Mr. Chairman, the only head that will be debated today is head 27.
Just 27.
Yes, the immigration head.
Thank you for that
We've
correction.
debated everything else besides head 27 within the ministry.
Thank you. Proceed, Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Give me a new sheet.
The executive summary reads as follows. Notwithstanding the financials contained on the Department of Immigration's budget brief, this brief contains highlight of the new border management system, the e-gates at the Aleph Wade International Airport, the mixed status family legislation, work permit application efficiencies, online payment procedures, work permit policy overhauls, and the hierarchical structural changes. B, the new account funding. As noted on page B297, the Department of Immigration has been allocated a budget for $5,504,000 for this fiscal year 2021. This budget has increased by $750,000, which has reflected a 16% increase in comparison with our financial year of 2019-2020. Mr. Chairman, the material changes in the subjective analysis of the current account estimates as compared with 2019-2020 can be found on pages B298. They are as follows. Communications, the estimate increases by 48% or $101,000. This is an increased cost linked to the increase in passport processing projected for the upcoming financial year. Rentals estimate increased by $74,000 in comparison to the original estimate of 2019-2020 in column 4. Although the increase seems to be drastic at 308%, it falls in line with the actuals received in the financial year 2018-2019 and the revised estimates for 2019-2020, ensuring sufficient funds are allocated for the services required. Repairs and maintenance estimates increased by 87% or $380,000. This increase is directly associated with the maintenance and support required to maintain the new border management system throughout the year. Materials and supplies. This estimate increased by $94,000 in comparison to the original estimate allocated for 2019-2020 to accommodate the costs associated with printing core services such as work permit cards and letters. Other expenses, Mr. Chairman, they increased by 67% or $60,000 in comparison with original estimates allocated for 2019-2020 to cover the costs associated with credit card commissions, deportation, and other miscellaneous expenses. Revenue summary. The revenue summary is outlined on page 298. The total revenue estimate for 2020-2021 is $23,947,000, an increase of $2,112,000 or 10% in comparison with 2019-2020. The most material changes are as follows. Passport issuance. Estimated revenue has increased by 42% compared to 2019-2020. That can be found at column 4. Work permits, or the permits to work and reside, is the estimated revenue for 2020-2021 has doubled in the amount in comparison with 1920 by $816,000 or 108%. Work permits. Appeals revenue also increased from $36,000 and that is an equivalence of 52% from 1920. Residence fees, the estimated revenue increased by $70,000 or 137% from 1920. Nationality, the estimated revenue increased by $114,000 compared to 2019-2020. The primary reason for the large increase of revenue was contributed to the conservative estimate review for the financial year 2020-21, the estimated revenue is more in line with the actual revenue collected both previously and current financial years, in addition to the 5% increase mandated by the government. Existing and new capital projects. Mr. Chairman, funds estimated for capital acquisitions for 1920 amount to $2,035,000 and can be found at page C15. That amount allocated includes $35,000 that will be allocated for the replacement of office furniture. The amount of $2 million has been allocated for the purchase of a new border management system to replace the aging system. Highlights for the key accomplishments of the financial year 1920. Immigration reform. Meaningful step changes for better efficiencies in processes are afoot in the Department of Immigration. All of these changes are exciting. Specifically, during 1920, the following actions occurred. Emphasize complaints and procedures for reporting breaches against the Bermuda Immigration and Protection Act 1956. The staff undertook the work permit application process, reduced the vetting timeline for the bulk of application submissions from more than 10 work permit applications submitted one by one employer at the same time. Vetting time was reduced from 18 days to 2 days. Prepared for the change to come under the current border management system, the new border management system will be online at the end of March 2020. Customer acceptance and testings occurred last month, and key stakeholder training is currently in process. Engage stakeholders for the implementation of e-gates is currently taking place at the Aleph Bay International Airport. And tabled is the Immigration and Protection Amendment Act of 2020. The primary goal is to deal with repatriation and to address mixed status families. New initiatives. As a continuance of immigration reform, we have begun to rewrite the work permit policy, to optimize our application forms, to implement and process online payments for applications. We will introduce a pilot program for employees beginning at the end of March 2020, to review the structure of our department so that the application process for all applications is efficient and quicker, to extend the direct oversight at the executive jet facility. Recruitment updates. The number of employees required at the department to operate efficiently is outlined on page B299. There are 44 established full-time posts, of which 5 of these posts are currently vacant. The vacant posts are 1 corporate services manager, 1 personnel services manager, 1 client services manager, 1 business systems officer, 1 customer service representative. Previous incumbents in the posts above have remained for the past 8 years. With the vacancies, there is therefore the requirement to update the job descriptions. This exercise is in train. In addition to this, we are reviewing shift schedules for our senior immigration inspectors with the aim, as much as possible, of reducing overtime financial payouts. We will take a collaborative approach by engaging the staff and the BPSU. I would like to thank the dedicated members and staff of the Department of Immigration. I would like to thank the immigration team under the leadership of Dr. Danette Ming, the Chief Immigration Officer, and Ms. Marita Grimes, the new appointed Chief Immigration Officer. Together with Ms. Lauren Sadler-Best of the Attorney General's Chambers, the Board of Immigration headed by Ms. Renee Ming, JPMP, and the Immigration Appeal Tribunal headed by Mr. Charles Richardson. Finally, I would also like to thank Mr. Ron McKell Davis, Ms. Darlene Smith, and Ms. Janelle Burgess for their respective teams, as well as the Collector of Customs, Ms. Lucinda Pearman, and her airport team for administrating the airport border control on behalf of immigration. Also thanks to IDT, Information and Digital Technology Office, for their timely assistance in ensuring that our systems are operable, particularly at the Aleph Wade International Airport. The IDT office and the Bermuda Airport Authority, especially Mr. James Campbell, are to be commended for working tirelessly with the department in respect of the new border management systems and e-gates. With these dedicated agencies, the work of the Department of Immigration may have been delayed or difficult. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Are there any other speakers? I recognize the Honorable Sylvan Richards, C7.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just made a comment to my colleague, MP Simons, that that's probably a record for the quickest brief I ever read during the budget debate. And I appreciate that.
I remember, let me clarify that I've just been advised that the whole debate is 3 hours.
Yes, I understand
Not
that.
5.
Yeah, I understand that. So I want to thank the minister for that. I can probably safely say that this debate's not going to last 3 hours. So I'm going to put that out there now for the listening public. But I do have some questions. I want to thank the minister for providing his brief in advance. That was very helpful because it enabled me to scratch approximately 5 or 6 questions off of the prepared list that I had. So without further ado, I'll jump right into my questions. I did note that on page A3 of the budget book, that the current account revenue estimate for 2020-21 is projected to increase by 10%, excuse me, or $2.1 million to $23.9 million. I also took note on page A6, and also it's on page B298, current account expenditure of the budget book, that for 2020-2021, the current account expenditure is projected to increase by $750,000 or 16% to $5.5 million. Referring to page A10 of the budget book, capital account expenditure for 2020-2021 is projected to increase by $108,000 or 5.6% to just over $2 million. My question is, what specifically accounts for this increase in capital spend? I've also made note that on page 812, the number of full-time equivalents for 2020-21 will be 44 full-time equivalents, which is a reduction of 6 FTEs of full-time equivalents. I'm moving now to page B298 of the budget book, current account expenditure. I've noted that salaries are basically will remain flat. Now on page 3, let me grab the budget brief. So I'm going to go to page 3 of the budget brief. Specifically to communications. So it's basically communications for 2020-21 are estimated to increase by 48% or $101,000 to $310,000. My question is the increased cost of passport processing the result of an increase in the number of passports being processed, or will it be an increase in the cost to process each passport? I'll read that again. Is the increased cost of passport processing the result of an increase in the number of passports being processed, or an increase in the cost to process each passport? If I can get some clarity on that. My second question, referring to professional services, also on page B298, for 2021, are estimated to increase by 7% to $169,000. I would like to get a description from the minister of what these professional services entail. Also, on page B298, under the revenue summary, referring specifically to business unit 8285, work permits, work and reside, that's the category. Work permits, work and reside. In 2020, 2021 are estimated to increase by, it works out to be 108% to $1.6 million. I would like to know what's the primary driver for this increase. Also on page B298, revenue summary, business unit 8286, or line item 8286, work permit appeals are estimated to increase by 52% to $105,000. My question is, I'd like to know why are the revenues from work permit appeals projected to increase? For example, are an increased number of declinations of work permits anticipated in the upcoming year? If that's not the reason, then I would like to get some clarity on that. Referring to line item 8293, residence fees are estimated in 2020, 2021 to increase by 137% to $121,000. I would like to know what is anticipated that will yield this result. Moving along, line item 8299, nationality revenue is estimated to increase by 175% to $179,000. My question again, I would like some clarity on what is driving this increase, this projected increase. Line item 8881, revenue as a result of penalties are projected to increase by 129% to $80,000. If the minister could, I would like for him to provide a description of what the penalties and fines are for various work permit violations. We can get some color around that. And then I have a question that came up as a result of the minister providing his brief in advance. I once again thank him for that. Line item 8291, land acquisition fee. So my question, when I look at page 5 of the brief, there's a number of line items that are outlined. And the reason given for the targets, and this is in the minister's brief on page 5, and I'll read it. It says, the primary reason for the large increases of revenue was contributed to conservative estimated revenue for financial year 2019-2020. Then it goes on to say, 2020-2021 estimated revenue is more in line with the actual revenue collected both the previous and current financial years, in addition to the 5% increase mandated by government. So basically, I'm saying that the actual revenues were more accurate than the originals. So my question when it comes to line item 8291, land acquisition fees, is the land acquisition fees for 2020-21 is estimated at $5.5 million. The 2019-2020 original estimate is also $5.5 million. However, the 2019-2020 actual revenue figure is $3.4 million, which is less, obviously, which is a $2.1 million difference. So my question is, based on the logic for the other line items, why does the government believe they can collect $5.5 million for this line item when the actual 2019-2020 figure was $3.4 million? So taking a quick look at it, it looks like that 5.5 million might be a bit aggressive in terms of achieving that result. So moving on to page B.
Say that one more time, please.
Okay. So the $5.5 million, that is the 2020-2021 estimate, it's the same figure as the 2019-2020 original estimate of $5.5 million. However, the 2019-2020 actual revenue figure is 3.4.
Which one, what number are we talking about?
I'm sorry, 8291, land acquisition fees. So go to page B298.
Because we've streamlined the process of making it easy for you.
Okay, you can respond. You can respond. You understand the question?
Yeah, my brain is just working.
Okay. No worries. I know it's still early. I don't wake up till like 1 o'clock in the afternoon anyway. I'm just saying. I'm not a morning person at all. All right, so moving along to page B300 of the budget book. Performance measures. And I'm referring to, let me turn to that page. So business unit 37010, corporate services, which is a new performance measure. This performance measure aims to measure the percentage reduction of customer inquiries for application updates in the corporate services section of the work permit application process. What I've noticed is that the 2020-2021 target outcome is 100%. I'm curious how this targeted outcome will be achieved and what will be done differently from the past to achieve this outcome. Then I have a general question for the minister and his technical advisors. Does Bermuda's Immigration Department benchmark Bermuda's performance measures with similarly sized jurisdictions, such as Cayman, to compare our outcomes with theirs? I ask that question because we're in a competitive environment. We're competing with other jurisdictions for business, and work permit approval process is going to be and is very important. So I'm curious how Bermuda measures up to our competitors of similar size in terms of work permit turnaround. Staying on page B300 of the budget book, looking at business unit 37020, personal services. So it states there that in the first column, the percentage of administrative tasks automated for resident type applications, Bermuda status, permanent resident certificates. The 2020-2021 target outcome for this performance measure is 25%. My question is, are there any plans to increase the percentage of this performance measure? And if so, please provide a description of these plans. This is also a new performance measure that's being implemented this year. Under the same business unit, 37020, personal services, I've noted that the average process time for passport issuance days, let me repeat that, the average process time passport issuance days has a 2020-2021 target outcome of 4 to 6 weeks. My question is, and it's indirectly related to this, has any progress been made in having the GBR code that's in the new passports being changed back to the old code? I believe it was BDA. I might be mistaken. BMU, right. Thank you for that clarification. As we all know, that GBR code is still causing confusion for Bermudian travelers. And I'm curious if any work has been done, if there are any ongoing negotiations to get that code changed back to GBR, or are we stuck with it from now until eternity? Because there definitely seems to be some reluctance in the past part of the Brits to do something about that. Moving on to page B301, business unit 37030, compliance. The first column there says that the percentage of passengers and employees satisfied with the new border management system, that's what it's measuring. The 2020-21 target outcome is 80%. I'm curious, how will that metric be measured? I know it's easy to measure the employees, but is there some type of survey that will be given to passengers coming through our brand new airport that will measure their satisfaction? So I'd like to get some comments on that. In the same business unit, compliance, third column down under that heading, it says that the average process time investigating illegal workers. It says that the 2020-2021 target outcome is 3 to 6 months. Now, I'm no expert, but this appears to be an inordinate amount of time, especially in a place the size of Bermuda, where people know everybody and people know who's working outside of their work permit remit. 3 to 6 months seems like a bit long to me. So I would like to get a description from the minister of a description of the various steps involved in an investigation. Obviously, it's going to start with a phone call to the department. I know the immigration department is giving this special attention. I'd like to get some background on what happens after that phone call is made. Is an immigration officer sent out to the site? Do they meet with the employer? Do they talk to other employees? I think the public would like to know what that looks like. And then, and this is going to be my last question, also on page B301, business unit 37040, finance and administration. It's found at the bottom of the page there. The number of key positions identified that require a succession plan. The target outcome is 2 positions. I would like to get a description of these positions, and I would also like to know whether these posts are able to be filled internally, and if not, why not? Thank you.
Thank you, member.
Chair.
Any further speakers? I recognize the Honorable Gordon Pamplin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to invite the honorable member to look at page B298, and you, Mr. Chair, page B298 in respect of head 8291 on the land acquisition fees, the revenue source. Now, my honorable colleague did ask the question whether the $5,500,000 was aggressive. But when we look at the minister's explanation that the uptick in some of the estimates for 2021 were in accordance with the actuals and revisions for 1819 and 1920, that number doesn't tie. It doesn't tie from the perspective that those land acquisition fees are, they were $5.5 million original. They were $2.783 million in 1819. They were $3.44 million in 1920, and which means that 1920 revision is nowhere close to the 5.5 that they thought that they were going to get in 1920, and now they're saying that they're still going to get $5.5 million. So the question to that is, what particular acquisitions are they anticipating, whether there is some particular increase of either application numbers or a particular size of state or anything like that, that they are maybe didn't get, maybe they anticipated it in 1920, it didn't come through, and that revenue is therefore being pushed forward to 2021, because these numbers are not congruent one with the other in terms of what's happening in the prior years, which is the explanation that the minister gave for the uptick. So I just want to make sure that we understand that the uptick, that the explanation given for the uptick makes sense, because right now I can't tie those numbers. The other question that I have is, in terms of the work and reside under 8285, can the minister give us some indication as to how many work permits are being processed? I'm not asking how many are in existence, because that number would be available through the statistical exhibits that we would have with the budget in the budget book. But I'm curious to know, what are you anticipating? What numbers of work permits are you anticipating coming through that would give rise to supporting the $1.575 million that is showing here? I also would like to refer to the page C15 in respect of capital acquisitions, and that is under business unit 76740, the business control systems. And the minister indicated that that had to do with eGate. And I certainly understand that there's $2 million that has been apportioned for the 2021 budget, but there was a revised estimate of 1.727 for last year. And the question that I have is that 1.727 being spent already, and the $2 million is going to be more money that's spent? This is on page C15. I just want to make sure that we're dealing with new expenditure that we're anticipating. And if that's the case, where do we stand? What is the progress that we've made thus far in terms of implementing the machinery that's required for the eGate processing? The other question is, will that eGate processing include just local passports, or will they be able to be adaptable to have people scanning other passports coming through that system? I'm just curious whether, and if so, I mean, I know under certain circumstances you can swipe your Bermuda passport going through a U.S. airport, but some passports, some countries' passports do not scan. So I'm just curious as to what the reach will be for our eGate system in terms of how people coming through will be able to swipe and make their access to the country a little bit easier. The honorable member did ask the question, but I just needed to underscore this in my mind in terms of communications on page B298 and the subjective analysis of expenditure. And that is, we had a $229,000 1819 actual. We budgeted 209. We're now budgeting 310, but the revised last year was 213. So the numbers are still a little bit much, they're much further away from each other than one would anticipate a revised budget to an actual to an estimated budget. So that 310 as against the 209 or the 213 needs some help with explanation. And I think also to underscore, I believe my colleague asked the question, but I didn't make a note of it if he did, in respect of R&M, where we only had a 300 revised and we're putting 819 in for this present year. The other question that I have is in respect of output measures, and this is on page B301, the average process time investigating an illegal worker. What is the experience that we've had? This is under, sorry, I had on the 37030 compliance.
Yes.
What is the history that we've had on this for the last 2 years in terms of the numbers of illegal workers that have been investigated? And how have the investigations tied in to the to people calling in and advising the department that something might be askew in terms of their observations of either people or job sites or whatever, something might not be quite right. So I'm just curious as to what that situation is. How many are we dealing with? And on average, it's fine to say that we're taking 3 to 6 months, and certainly I can mention, Mr. Chair, that I actually sat in this position, so I'm fully aware of some of the challenges that come through. But I just think that just as an update, it would be interesting to know exactly where we stand in that regard. And the other thing that I'm looking at is ESERs, which are the ex-spouses' rights certificates. And this is on page B300 on the personal services. We have these certificates are on average 2 to 3 months to process. And that is, I'm just wondering, what is the backlog that exists in that particular area? And if the minister could also indicate whether, that's ESERs. Let me just put what, I guess the definitive question there is what is the backlog that we have in processing these? And it's only just because of questions that have come where people have actually been waiting. I've said to them that these are things that take time, the investigations take time, and you have to be patient. But my question is, how reasonable is it for somebody to have a reasonable expectation that once they get to 3 months? Because the one thing about ESERTs is that there could be a possibility of hardship for families when you have these ex-spouses, when it comes to them being able to work to support the children of the Bermudian family that they have created. And therefore, we want to make sure that if they are going to be allowed to stay on island, that clearly they need to be processed as expeditiously as possible. And the other question that I have is, my honorable colleague asked the question with respect to passport processing, but and also the status of BMU versus GBR in the passports. But what we heard in this honorable house, I believe, probably, I didn't have the opportunity to go to the Hansard, but we did hear that the Premier indicated in last time's Premier's questions, not last weekend, but the time before, that there was a process in place that the UK wanted $1 million for us to be able to take back the processing of passports locally. That number obviously was untenable. Certainly, I don't believe that either government nor, and certainly we in opposition, would not support paying for something that we had that was taken away from us when we had no input, and then to pay to get it back seems to be a nonsense. But with that said, is there any belief that going forward, if we should be able to have the passports, is there any provision to be able to purchase supplies? We would have to have a stack of new passports. If our plan comes through that we are able to take back over the processing of our own passports, what would be, I don't see that there's particularly any money set aside for, for buying additional stocks of passports. And if such is the case, what would be our access to the biometric type passport information that seems to be a requirement internationally? Those would be my questions.
Thank you, honorable member. Any further speakers? If not, I call on the minister.
One second, please.
Yes. If I can just enlighten the listening audience, we are continuing in Committee of Supply for further consideration of the estimates of revenue and expenditure for the year 2020/2021. And we are on head 27 with a 3-hour debate time limit. Minister, are you?
Mr. Chairman, the technical officers are still compiling. There were about 20,
Responses?
there were 25, about 25 to 30 questions that were asked. The team is in the back just literally compiling some of those answers now. Just crave your indulgence as they literally putting them the final touches on the answers to my honorable colleagues' questions.
Thank you for that. I'll take a brief break.
The question with reference to line item 8285 work permits, work to reside. That line item relates to the work permit holders who may request permission to seek alternative employment in Bermuda. Line item 8286.
Can you refer to the page as well if you have it?
Page B298, thank you.
Thank you.
The line item on B298, line item 2, wrong. Line item 8285,
Yes.
work permit, work
Yep.
to reside.
Mhm.
This line item relates to work permit holders who may request permission to seek alternative employment in Bermuda. Page B298, line 8286, work permits, appeals. This line item relates to appeals directly to the minister, usually for work permit refusals. Page B298, line 8881, penalties. Penalties are usually issued as civil penalties, starting at $5,000. Penalties can jump up to $10,000 for the second or subsequent breaches by employers and persons within 7 years. Employers can be fined by employing a person to work without a permit or having a person work outside the scope of their work permit. Persons can be fined for working without a work permit or, again, working outside the scope of their permit.
Mhm.
With reference, Mr. Chairman, to the question by the learned member Gordon Pamplin, who asked the question with reference to the passport. Most recently, I traveled in November to the United Kingdom and met with the foreign officials from the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, Her Majesty's Passport Office, and with the overseas representatives for Bermuda. They shared with us what they believe would have been a significant scenario for Bermudians to pay for the administration of the passports. And two things that they shared, that'll be over $1 million to have the passports repatriated to Bermuda, the fixing of the passports to Bermuda, and going from the GBR code to the BMU code. And the next challenge that we had was the time continuum. The time continuum is that they can do it, but it will be in July or in the spring of 2021. We shared with them that there were significant challenges around both of those considerations. And so they said that they would take it under advisement. The MP, her name escapes me right now, Mr. Chairman, she said she would take this back to her colleagues and to share with them that Bermuda indeed had a problem, number one, with the length of time it would take to repatriate the processing of the passports in Bermuda, and number two, the cost of $1 million, we believe that it was cost prohibitive for us to take something that cost us nothing and was taken to the UK to say you can indeed have it back. And we asked why. They shared with us that it was just not an arbitrary number that was plucked indeed out of the ether. They shared with us that it was now a much more complicated process. Holograms, specific codings, biometrics that were now being embedded in the process. And so they shared, based on economies of scale, you can do it for a large region like in England, and that equipment is based on economies of scale. To do all of that, to have the passports with all of the biometrics embedded, to have all of the information that's embedded, you still need that level of equipment to do so in Bermuda, and that it was not just a cost to do in Bermuda. The science behind the passports, the biometrics embedded in the kit, to get all of those passports, to get the specialized, my word is paper, it's not actually paper, the specialized paper for the passports. When you put all of those together, that amalgam of intelligence, the amalgam of the security, putting all those things, getting the kit into Bermuda, using the software, all of those things together, that is how that's how the cost, they have said to us, that's why the cost was that voluminous. We shared with them that if you're looking at a number of other jurisdictions and scaling, and that we believe that that cost was still exceedingly high. We were told when we investigated more that they had an election in England and that we can have the discussion directly after the election. Directly after the election, we went back to recommence talks. They said to us, listen, we have to do this after Brexit because that's our most important focus after Brexit. We went in after Brexit, and guess what has happened now, Mr. Chairman?
Could you tell us?
We have the COVID challenge that we're facing now, and everyone has said, listen. And so passports for a very small country in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, that is really significant to us. It obviously has paled on the list of importance to everyone else. And so what we're doing is we're going to continue these talks. It is a matter of priority. Like to my colleague, Ms. Gordon Pamplin, it is a priority to us, and it's something that we have to push. And we will recommence talks with the relevant stakeholders in England, as we know it's important. And to my colleagues, Mr. Richards as well.
You have further answers, Minister?
I am seeking your leave just to make a quick.
For the listening radio audience, the minister is still collecting answers to the questions that were presented under head 27. I recognize the honorable member Gordon Pamplin in the meantime.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, just while the minister is getting some questions, I just have another real quick question in respect of performance measures, and this is in respect of corporate services under Business Unit 37010 on page B300. It's at the top of the page. And the minister has indicated that this is a new measure, new targeted outcome, the number of days for the vetting steps of bulk work permit applications, 2 working days. I wonder if the minister could just take us through what the actual steps are in respect of this process, only from the point of view that if you've got major hotels and whomever, this is where you're going to get bulk, you're going to get seasonal, you're going to get a significant number of applications which will come through at the same time. By the same token, there is the necessity to vet the applicants to ensure that we don't have adequate Bermudian applicants for those positions. We also need to have the time to liaise between workforce development and the ministry to make sure that there's nobody on the job board or whatever who has the necessary skills to fill those positions before the actual permits are being given. So I wonder if the minister could just give us some indication as to what the new process is that would cut that time down to 2 working days to ensure that we are not overlooking what our Bermudian employees, prospective employees might be subjected to.
Thank you. I now recognize the minister again.
The page B301,
Mhm.
the question was asked, how long does it take? The question was asked in P301 that it took by a compliance officer, that it took between 3 to 6 months to do an investigation. The question by the honorable member was, that seems like an inordinate amount of time for an investigation. Why does it take 3 to 6 months to do an investigation if a person is, if there is an allegation that a person is an illegal worker or working outside of their work permit? This is the answer, Mr. Chairman. The process for investigating an illegal worker entails the following. A general investigation is the first step to determine whether there is sufficient information to advance onto a full scope investigation. During the preliminary work by the compliance section, consideration is also given as to whether or not the case is applicable for civil penalties. The performance measure of 3 to 6 months is sufficient because it allows the coordination of interviews, caution statements, recommendation to the minister for punitive measures or not, i.e. the ability for a person to continue in Bermuda to work, or directive to settle their affairs and depart Bermuda. Civil penalties take a separate road and are considered by the chief immigration officer. The performance measure also accounts for staffing levels. As you know, the compliance section splits its duty between Hamilton, the headquarters, and the airport. On average, the compliance section undertakes to investigate approximately 125 complaints a year. Mr. Speaker, if you can just imagine this, if you are company A, and Mr. Chairman, you are company A, and somebody alleges that a person is working outside of your work permit, you have to do a series of investigations. You have to compile the report. You have to take caution statements, and this actually takes a period of time. And so you're saying 3 to 6 months. Clearly, that is a long period of time, and it seems like it is an inordinate amount of time. Another consideration is that we're looking at the same staff that are used at the airport to man the airport. Yes, and so when we're talking about a department that has a limited amount of staff, this year the people of Bermuda have said, listen, something that is important to us, we want to make sure that Bermudians are given a place of primacy in their country. And that is something that this government has made as a priority. And with the email address that has come forward, with the telephone number that has been given to the public, with the ability to understand that there is an opportunity for you to say, there are people that I think that are working outside. We have seen approximately 125 complaints a year. They have done an amalgam of these complaints, and that is how we get the time. There is an opportunity for there to go to a robust process where people are brought in, where they're interviewed, and this process it lasts up to from 3 to 6 months.
You have further responses, Minister?
Still waiting. With reference to, Mr. Chairman, with reference to the process that the learned member Gordon Pamplin spoke about, the process with the work permit process, that was a process that we had KPMG. They were embedded in the department, and they met with the staff for over a period of just over a year. Firstly, let's go back a minute. This was funded by Business Bermuda, by International Business. They put approximately $500,000 into this process. And so the first phase of this was for the team to understand where were the lacunas and where were the doubters, as there is no formal or computerized system of doing this. So your company A, you have a file. Those files are actually vetted formally by people in the staff. And that means If there are people calling from the job board, they have to call, get all the information from the job board, affix that to the file. If there are people that are just doing general applications, everyone, if there are 20 Bermudians that are there in that process, the 20 Bermudians have to be called. If there are objections to that process, the objections have to be put on that process. So the file is a gigantic file that was put together for each employee. So during accounting season, it is renewal season, or if it's during the season in the hotel where we're going into the pre-tour season, certain elements will see where there is a gigantic uptick in applications. And so you will see when in the reinsurance companies, when they're going into their high period, where a number of files will be coming in and everyone is saying, hurry up, we need these files. And the department with limited resources and everyone having to vet the files, it was actually becoming labor intensive. And so we went in and there was a huge backlog and everyone was saying one of the biggest problems that we're having with immigration outside of the mixed status families and outside of the PRCs is the actual processes and procedures with immigration. What we went in with was a process of streamlining that process. The process, when KPMG went in, they said, we want to take it from this many days and we want to get this streamlined. How do we do that? Where are the biggest points where the file is taking the longest? Well, it's the vetting phase. What is the vetting phase? The vetting phase is, were there people on the job board? How many people were there? Sometimes you have a company like MEF that are hiring. You have a number of companies that are hiring a number of chefs. There are hotels that are looking at a number of chefs, sous chefs, or I wish I knew another type of chef, right? You have pastry chefs. You have companies that are hiring a number of people, and chef de partie, chef de wife, right? They're hiring a number of people, but it's the same 3 or 4 people applying for each one of these jobs. And so they had to do a system of vetting and looking at all of these files. What would normally happen is they will get one file, look at the file for company A, put that file down, and they will go to another files. This is a system of where they systematically look at these files to organize vetting of the files. They bring it to a meeting on a Thursday, and they will go through all of the files together, systematically making sure that all the files have the correct information. Before, they were picking up the files in onesies and twosies and looking at those files in arbitrary manners. Now they're able to get all of the files together, put on the list, and look at company A. And they're able to look at company A, and they're able to go down. Company A, has company A checked all the boxes with reference to references? Go down the line, yes. Has company A, do they have everything that company B is supposed to do in this line? Has everyone had the reference checked? Have there been all the Bermudians? Okay, this person on this particular file, pull this file out. This file has to be vetted. Have you called? So we're able to have a way where you're able to look at all the files for a particular entity together, but more importantly, you're able to have a mass vetting. And if there are anomalies or if there are people that stand out, they're able to literally highlight the anomalies and deal with them effectively, as opposed to the old system where they get put on the side and dealt with at a later date. This allows a company that has a number of people that are similar in nature, for you to look at them, for the staff to come in at one time together as a team and to say, listen, this is company A. Company A has this many work permits. You sit down and all of the criteria put at that side. The next column is everything that we're looking for each file. Did everybody fill out the criteria for these 25 files? The vetters would say all of those criteria for those 25 files were completed. That's a good one. Have we looked at all of those categories with reference to vetting of Bermudians, completing the job board? And when they finish all their qualifications, you can go through all of those things and understand that all the vetting has taken place. And then the team can look at these things in en masse. The question that the honorable member has raised is actually the question that everyone is concerned about. The vetting process should not take away the primary concern, is that employers have a sieve where we are not doing the proper checks and balances. The next stage in this process, it's still labor intensive. The next phase, the financial phase, is the digitization process. This process still is where, because that has to be the next question that's coming. the next phase of the digitization process. This part of the process still has human fingers in the pies. Now you need for this process to have a digitized process that actually costs money, and that is something that we're going to go back to our business colleagues and partners and say, we finished phase, the first phase. What was the first phase? The first phase will understand the lacunas or the doubts or the gaps in immigration, right? And how do we fix that? The next phase was bringing KPMG in. KPMG came in and said, guys, you're doing a lot of things really well. However, this is how we could do differently. That was done in conjunction with the team at immigration. This is how we could do differently. You know what? If I had some more support in this area, or if I didn't have to run to this person to get this file, or if I didn't have to do to this, we can actually make this meeting. I have actually, Mr. Chairman, been a part of the streamline process. It is actually phenomenal. It's chalk and cheese now. So you can have the process. And I've had concerns if you know something about an industry and I can vet it. So the files are they're still in your, you still have a physical file where you can check. So this is not something where it is an abstract and you just have the paper in front of you. You can still look at the physical file if there are any concerns. Yes, we believe that this process could even be more efficient. So this is a step on the road. The next road is that this must become digitized. Why did we not naturally just go to the digitization process? Because we cannot afford it at this juncture. We're going to the e-gate part of the program. The e-gate part of the program, for the listening audience, when you come in, as in London, or if you're in another one of the gateway cities after this process of the COVID virus dies on a bit, you tap your passport on the gate and you walk out. We will have that facility for Bermuda. That facility, as when the airport opens, we will be able to do it. In the first instance, it will be Bermuda passports. It is a move. In 3 to 4 months subsequent to that, where we'll be able to do the UK, Canada, and the United States of America as well.
Thank you, Minister.
Can I just
recognize the Honorable Gordon Pepper.
Thank you. Can I just ask for a matter of clarity with the minister's explanation? Because I know that I've gone through, as I mentioned before, I did sit in that seat, and I went through some of the painstaking steps of the vetting process. The minister is indicating this new two-day targeted outcome. So is this the 2-day targeted outcome post digitization, or are we there now in terms of being able to say that it's taking 2 days for the process? And that's question one. And then question two, the percentage reduction on the same page, B300, under the same corporate services, the percentage reduction of customer inquiries for application updates in the corporate services section for work permit application processes. And he wants to try and eliminate that by the looks of it. You want to reduce by 100% the number of customer inquiries. And I think that if people know that they have they'll probably think in their minds maybe 5 days. And if they have it back within that period of time, then there would be no necessity to call. So I understand where where the measure would come in. But the question then becomes, what is the actual communication process? Because we're dealing with limited numbers of people doing the work. So what would be the communication process between the actual completion of the application to say, yes, it's good to go, and communicating with the applicant to say that this permit has been approved, so that they don't have to call?
So if you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for that question, because obviously you're dealing with somebody that knows the process much better than I. So I have to make sure that my I's are dotted and my T's are indeed crossed.
Yes.
The process, Mr. Chairman, if you can just obviously proverbially close your eyes with me for a second. The process in the end is for us to have a digitized system that will have a sugar or an automated system in the beginning. So when you do an online application, you actually can go to the next phase of the application online until you've completed everything. When you get a successful application, you'll get an automatic notification in the beginning that your application is successfully entered. And when the process is vetted, in the end, in our final state, you'll get an automated notification telling you that the application has been completed. It will have some determined periods where you can go online through a portal and at every stage of the process see where your application is during that process. That is our end state. And if we were to tell you where our end state is going to be, that is where we believe the end state should be, and that's where we're working towards. Our beginning state was a room filled with files where dedicated staff were going around those files on a room full of files trying to fix that. Where we are now is that we have a process where we're taking it from 18 to 2 days. What happens now, the staff through email, through telephone calls are notifying our key stakeholders. We did the pilot programs and the pilot schemes. And when we had the companies that were doing the pilot programs through this notification progress, to say that they were blown away is the understatement of the year. We took a company that has a number of work permits. And when we were able to go through this, through the vetting process, we sat in a room as a team and we went through this process. And at the end, we saw a process. And so if we follow this process now, we believe that we can take a process on average and decrease that time scale significantly from to 2 days. I don't believe you hit the 2-day mark every time, because sometimes you have matters that require some more calls. I do believe, though, as we progress to the digitization portion, that you will automatically know where your application is. Employers will see that the days of the 40-day wait are over. The days of the 40-day wait where we were a year ago, the 40 and 60-day wait, not for the decision, for the vetting part, those days are over. We believe we still have further to go. I am confident that Dr. Ming and our team are fastidious in their desire to make this move forward. There are some things that they can only do so much. We obviously need the budget to make the digitization process take place. This year, This year, you saw $2 million go towards the e-gate at the airport. We believe having an e-gate at the airport is actually really important for our egress out of the airport. Mr. Chairman, if you'll just allow me to just go to some more questions.
Continue. While you're looking, take the opportunity to recognize in the chamber the former MP, Arthur Hudson. I also see some members from the Senate, in fact, the leader of the opposition, and Robinson. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Minister, you can proceed.
Question: Does the Immigration Department benchmark performance against other jurisdictions in light of the fierce competition from other jurisdictions? The answer: part of the process improvement work performed during 2019 included the department in reviewing the process for other jurisdictions such as Canada, Cayman, Singapore, and China. Basic information reviewed included the type of work permits, the overall regime in place, processing times and application fees, policies, submission templates, and whether there was formal governance in place over the entire immigration process. All of this information was used to assist in making recommendations to streamline our process. This work is still underway in 2020. We are currently reworking the entire workflow that is necessary within our department prior to the automation process. This is a difficult process, and hundreds of man-hours have been used in this process so far. Benchmarking is the only aspect of the process. We expect to introduce better benchmarks with shorter turnaround times and processing some re-engineered processes in the future. What is driving the increase? And I answered that. Performance measures. Does the Bermuda Immigration Department benchmark its performance? Just answered that. How is passenger satisfaction being captured? Will there be customer surveys? We will conduct customer surveys. Succession planning. What is the description of these plans, and can they be filled internally? Guided by training at the Department of Human Resources, the Chief Immigration Officer has identified hard to fill positions within the Department of Immigration. The two positions are client services officers in the personnel services section. One position focuses on travel documents and land applications, and the other position focuses on residency.
Any further speakers? Minister, you have other responses?
Just waiting for an email to come through.
Okay. I don't know know if there's any intent to outnumber us here today, but I see another senator from Senator Jardine in the gallery.
The meeting at lunchtime.
I recognize the Honorable Gordon Pamplin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I wonder if the minister could also indicate, I know he's indicating that the workload and the backlogs existing in the department have been, they've done a really good job in catching up. I wonder if the minister could give us an indication by category as to what outstandings there are. I know that at one point in time we used to get reports, and they wouldn't do it now because the systems have changed, but just an idea that says that you've got work permits, you've got ESERs, you've got status, you've got PRCs, you've got all these various types of applications, and then we would say how many new ones came in during the course of the week and how many have been processed, and therefore how many are outstanding. So I wonder if we could get some indication as to what outstanding items that we have as we speak, or as recently as possible, so that we have some indication as to where we are. I know the day-to-day processes are fine, but some of the other things are extraordinary, things like land licenses and stuff like that, which take a different level of interrogation and investigation in order to complete. I just wonder where we are in terms of what we have outstanding in those various categories.
Thank you, member. I recognize the minister.
We will get those answers. The team, as we're talking, the team are in the immigration department responding to these questions. As you can see, Mr. Chairman, my technical team is actually in the room working, beavering away with responding to these questions. Just as an aside, the immigration department understands that we've had 2 resignations in the last few months and positions. As you can see, some of these posts have to be regraded and go through management services. So most people would simply say, if you're listening, say, well, let's just go ahead and hire someone tomorrow. It is actually not that simple within the civil service. You heard from the minister today. We're looking at the civil services has some restrictions, and we have to go through a process for posts to be regraded. So you just hear somebody say, well, there are tons of people in Bermuda that need work. Just go out and grab 2 warm bodies and bring them in the department. This is actually a specialized area. The chief immigration officer, she actually knows what the department needs. She has a plan. She's going through the Department of Management Services. They're going through a process to look at the job descriptions. Those job descriptions have to be regraded to come with what the 2020, what that looks like. And that is something that we realize that we have to accelerate. What does this do? This means that the team they are juggling with more than one hand at the moment. And we believe one of the reasons why the processes and streamlining the processes are so important, it actually will allow our team to focus on some other elements. The question that was asked, corporate services at B30, 370110. B300.
Yes.
Performance measures, the number of days for bulk vetting of work permits applications is at 2 days. Can the minister walk us through the process? The vetting process is time intensive because the duplication of information requested, and it has to be reviewed. The applications were split between a number of persons and sent to each person for their approval. This process was bifurcated and piecemeal. This lends itself to duplication of effort and duplication of work, and a significant amount of rework, a waste of time, and process delays. Additionally, it is an iterative process of requesting, reviewing, and re-requesting information that was occurring through this process, and increased the time for turning around work permit applications. The new process has 100% of the same rigor for vetting and looking and ensuring that all of the key bases are covered, and ensures that the rigor required for the employee to reformat and resubmit the information in a different and more streamlined process.
Minister, you have more questions coming.
I do.
Yeah.
I
Mr. Chair.
recognize the Honorable Gordon Pamplin.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I recognize the difficulty in terms of getting all the responses. And since we are sort of very close onto the, if the minister would agree that we could maybe break a little early and then they can seek the responses. We won't have many more questions after the fact. So if we can have the responses prepared and compiled over the lunch break, and then once we come back, we can have it all done and dusted, I think that will be more efficient use of everybody's time.
Minister?
I have seen some collaborative efforts in this space today. I'm most grateful to my colleagues.
Can someone take us to lunch, please?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the House now adjourn for lunch.
Members, it has been moved that the House now adjourn for lunch, and we will return at 2 o'clock.